Looks like we are being live streamed now.
Lawrence, I still have a note on my screen. I don't know that it matters that we are technically in a practice session.
Right.
You can tell me if that's an issue or not, but I too see that we are live on YouTube.
Yep. I'm going to begin the webinar right now.
Yep. Okay.
So, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Lawrence. Welcome to the July 14th, 2021 BAR Large Virtual Meeting. My name is John Robinson. The other board members present this afternoon are Jay White, who is recusing for agenda item number 1, James Metters and Kara Wheeler serving as alternate. City staff present this afternoon are Tori Parrish, Lawrence Courtney, and Frankie Pinto. The order of the meeting will be as follows. There will be an introduction and overview of the project by city staff to the board and for the public. This will be followed by the application presentation, which has a 10-minute time limit unless extended by the chair, and any questions following of the applicant by the board or staff. Any and all presenters should clearly state their name for the record. Persons affiliated with the project, be they the owners, developers, designers, consultants, or other affiliates, should speak during this portion of the meeting rather than during public comment. The application presentation period is followed by a 10-minute public comment period, or may be extended by the chair. The applicant does not respond to comments made during the public comment period. Any person speaking during the public comment period should clearly state their name for the record. All public comment submitted in writing in advance pursuant to additional protocols we'll cover in a minute have already been incorporated into the record. The public comment period is followed by the city staff comment and recommendation period. After this, there will be an applicant response or clarification to public comment and city staff comments and recommendations. 5-minute rule also applies to this response period. The applicant then takes a seat and speaks only if called upon by board or staff to answer questions or for other considerations. This is followed by a board discussion and vote. The applicant presentation and public comment period is now closed. The applicant may clarify inaccurate information when recognized by the chair by raising a hand and waiting to be called upon, but otherwise may only speak if asked a question by a board member or by staff. I would note that items number 6 and 7 have been withdrawn in this afternoon's agenda. Ms. Parrish can correct me if I'm wrong on any of that. This is a request to our participants this evening to turn off all cell phones and other devices. Members of the public are reminded that they are to limit their comments to architecture only. Comments related to zoning, such as parking, traffic, lot coverage, and livability concerns are not the purview of this board and therefore cannot be voiced here. Some additional protocol for the public and our participants. Please note the following updates to public participation made in 2021, beginning with the September 22nd, 2020 meeting and all meetings going forward. The deadline to submit written comments is 12 p.m. one business day before the meeting. The deadline to sign up to speak is 12 p.m. the day of the meeting. Written comments are received by the board in advance of the meeting and will be acknowledged in the record and summarized. If this is a concern, you are encouraged to sign up to speak at the meeting. Additional public comment thank you, Lawrence, you can go ahead. Additional board protocol. Staff control the PowerPoint presentation that includes everything submitted by the applicant by the deadline in accordance with submittal requirements. Applicants simply need to ask staff to advance to the slide that they want to view during their presentation. Applicants, staff, and board members are required to give their name whenever speaking. Video and microphones have been disabled for all attendees. Attendees, as opposed to board members or staff, will only be given the capabilities to speak when they are called on during the public comment period. The chat and QA functions have been disabled for everyone. Results and staff comments will be posted on the city website at www.charleston-sc.gov/BAR. Some additional protocol regarding public comment. The applicants, meaning all team members and the public, have been required to register, indicate the project they wish to comment on, and submit any documents in advance of the meeting. Just as at an in-person meeting, all applications heard today are part of a public meeting format. If you have registered and will speak during the public comment portion of the meeting, you'll need to state your name and address for the record. Those members of the public that have registered will be called upon in order by project. Staff will call on the registered members of the public to speak for each project. Unregistered members of the public who raise their hand will not be called upon. Again, written comments have been received by the board in advance and will be summarized. Additional protocol regarding the board. Board members will be polled by the chairperson for comments and for their vote on a motion. Each member, when voting, should respond yea in favor or nay not in favor. The chair will reread the motion verbatim. The board member making the motion should correct the chair if he has not reread the motion accurately. If a board member needs to recuse, he or she will temporarily be removed from the meeting and placed back in the meeting at the start of the next agenda item. If the board needs to go into executive session, they will call into a separate conference line, and all video and audio on Zoom will temporarily be turned off until they are ready to return to the regular meeting. Ms. Parrish, what is agenda item number 1 for this evening?
All right, we're starting with 289 King Street. The request is final approval of previously approved design, which is now expired, for a clear-story rooftop apartment and amenity use at rear of the building. This was previously approved on November 10th, 2015. It's in the Height Districts 3 and 6. The building was constructed between 1944 and 51, and it's in the Old and Historic District. We've got contact slides. This is the building's location. It fronts King Street, and to the north is Liberty Street. This is the front photo of the front of 289 King Street. This actually is an image taken from Liberty Street, showing the building beyond and where some of the work is going to be visible atop the brick structure beyond. This is where the project is to your left. This is looking west. And this is back on King Street, where the building is to your right on the west side of the street. This is a historic image of the building, which is interesting. And then we've got Sanborn maps for you showing the context through the history. And with this one, we're going to have Miss Tara Romano and Mr. Neil Stevenson, and they have been promoted to panelists.
Thank you. Ms. Romano, you have the floor.
Hey, how are you doing? Tara Romano, Neil Stevenson Architects. So this one, as Tori mentioned, is a request for an extension of a previously approved project. It looks like we inadvertently missed the BAR extension in the Mayhem. The zoning has been kept current throughout the time. The conceptual BAR approval was for a clear story at the front and a rooftop addition at the far rear. The addition at the far rear is a full story lower than the new current height district, so it remains in compliance. And then the clear story part at the front had received a height variance for just a few feet at the zoning level. There were no units were added with the project. It currently has 11 apartment units and will still have 11 apartment units. The owner, just background, the owner's been held up waiting to get access to the ground floor, which has a different owner, so that they can do the structural work necessary for this project. So they're now ready to proceed and planning to start, we were planning to start drawing for preliminary BAR, but needed to tie this part up in a bow. Would you like me to step through the drawings?
Sure, you have the allotted period. To the extent you want to cover highlights and refresh our memory, I think that's fine.
Okay. All right. So this is just the cover sheet with the breakdown. Next slide. Front elevation. Next slide. These are some views from King Street of the building. Next slide. And like she had shown you from Liberty. Next slide. These are some sketch renderings of the new, top left is from the corner of King and Wentworth. And then the bottom is from Society Street, stepping back where you start to see a little bit of the clear story up there. Next slide. And then these are views stepping back from King Street, where you can see the addition in the far background at the bottom. And again, that addition back there, it's a full story lower than the height district. The height district is 6 stories, and that addition goes up to 5 stories. And from this view, you can't see the clear stories towards the front of the building. And then at the top is the sketch from Liberty Street, where you can see the addition, you know, just at the very top here. And right across the street, there's another addition, kind of just like this. Is it Blue Ion? My brain can't remember. And then next slide. Site plan, which will not change at all. Next slide. This is the ground floor plan. There's no work in this area, except for there would be a column that'll drop down in there. Next slide. Second floor plan. The existing is at the bottom and the proposed at the top. You can see the configuration is really barely changing. They're just moving some walls around. The point of the renovation, these are really small kind of college units right now with very little light in the bedrooms. So the point of this project is to get an extra bathroom, washer dryers, and to get extra light and ventilation into these units. So again, it's the same number of units. They'll just have better living quality to them. Next slide. Existing third floor is at the bottom and proposed third floor at the top. Next slide. This is the existing, there's a mezzanine level you can see at the bottom, and then at the top is the proposed mezzanine level, and this is where the clear stories will pop up to allow for light into these bedrooms. Next slide. This is the fourth floor roof level plan. On the right, you can see the clear story popping up, and then on the left is part of that rear addition, and then at the top is the penthouse level, the fifth floor. Next slide. And the roof plan existing at the bottom and proposed at the top. It's shed, it's mostly shed roofs. Next slide. Where's that it? Oh, these are the front King Street elevations. Again, that rear addition is a story lower than what the height district allows. Next slide. This is the side elevation on Liberty Street. At the bottom is the existing, and then at the top is the proposed. Next slide. From the rear elevation, proposed and existing. Next slide. And then from the north side, these parts are not really visible from the right of way. Next slide. And this is, I guess, a street elevation from Liberty showing the buildings that are kind of in front of it. Next slide. Maybe the last. Nope, and a section showing how the building works. Next slide. This is directly across the street for Liberty Street is another addition, kind of a precedent of similar type of addition. At the top there. Next slide. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Romano. All right. Do we have any public comment for this agenda item, Tori?
No, sir.
All right. City staff comments or recommendations?
All right. I would like to clean up something here. I previously read that this request is for final approval. It's actually for conceptual approval, which is the level where the approval lapsed. So I'll have that changed in the meeting results. But staff comments, the project received conceptual approval November 10th, 2015. Since then, extensions were filed, but lapsed after December 31st, 2019. No changes have been made to the previously approved submittal set. The most visible part of the project will be from a small portion of Liberty Street, and this elevation of the new portion features well-balanced glazing and siding to counterplay with the monolithic brick structure below. We're recommending approval of conceptual design.
Thank you very much. Anything further, Ms. Romano?
No, thanks.
Okay, great. We will then move to a board discussion and potential vote on this agenda item. What do my fellow board members have to say about this project?
This is Carol Wheeler. The fact that nothing was changed in this submittal in comparison to the previously approved submittal, and the fact that it's still compliant with the height and zoning requirements, I would concur with staff's recommendation.
Yeah, and just very briefly, not have anything to offer on the merits, I'd say since it was already approved and there are no modifications, I join in Ms. Wheeler's sentiment. Other board members on this agenda item?
Mr. Chairman, if you'll take a motion, I'd move for approval.
Okay, Mr. Metters has made a motion for conceptual approval of agenda item number 1. Is there a second?
I'll second this, Carol Wheeler.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. So we have a motion and a second. I'll proceed to call the roll. This was going to be a short one tonight. Ms. Wheeler, how do you vote on this motion?
Aye in favor.
And Mr. Metters?
Aye in favor.
And myself, aye in favor. The agenda item is, what's that?
This is Luda.
Oh, Luda, there you are. Okay. Luda, you were missing off of the top of my roll, so I apologize, and you were not on my screen. Luda, how do you vote on this agenda item?
Yay in favor.
Thank you. Passes 4-0. Thank you to the applicant.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Agenda item number 2, 20 Earhart Street.
Okay, this
20
is
Earhart Drive, excuse me.
Drive. Yeah, we went back and forth on that one. The request is final approval of demolition of the structure. It sits within the Medical District. It was built in 1964 and is in the Old City District. We have some context slides for this one also. We've got an aerial. This is B Street, left to right across the top of the page, and Earhart, right there where the red where the red dot is. There are 2 structures that we'll be looking at that are adjacent to each other, and the first one is 20 Earhart. This is some existing photos taken from Earhart Drive. This is actually taken from B Street with Earhart on the right side of the screen looking east. This is on B Street looking west. And this is on Earhart looking south, where the building would be on your left behind the White House here, and behind, it's a couple of parcels down. All right, with this one, we've got Mr. Jake Beck, who's been elevated to panelist. And I also noticed Mr. Monty is on. Does he need to speak also?
He's available for comments if
Okay.
required, but I think
Okay.
he's here.
Mr. Beck, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jake Beck, AIA with LFK Architects. The proposed building, this is one of 2, as Tori mentioned, 20 Earhart. It's an existing 2-story apartment building, built in 1964. Next slide, please. This is a little bit, look at the context of what's around. Again, B Street, Earhart Street. This is on the site of MUSC. Next slide, please. And one more for me. So this fits into a larger sort of plan for the university, but this is one building here highlighted in orange. The site itself is outlined in red. Next slide, please. There are some existing trees on site that are being demolished as well. That has been submitted and approved by the BZA. Next slide, please. Also associated with this building, there is some hardscape that is being requested to be demolished. So there's some paths behind the building as well as in front of the building. Next slide, please. One more. As previously mentioned, this is kind of a look down Earhart Street, existing structures. The bottom left photo is really the one in question here. The one on the right is the building that's being proposed to be demolished. And then you can see the existing transformer to a main to the right there, or electrical substation. Next slide, please. This is a look at the building itself as it stands. It's a 2-story brick and lap siding, low sloped roof building. Originally designed as apartment style housing, and now it's currently being used as offices for MUSC. Next slide, please. Just another couple looks around the exterior of the building. You can kind of see residential doors, a couple units on the main floor. Next slide, please. And around the back side, of note on the bottom two photos, that is the tree that's being requested to be removed, as well as some of that hardscape paths along there. Next slide, please. One more. Yep. This is the Sanborn map, and the current information that we have on the property. It's just a two-story brick and lap-sided building built in 1964. Currently houses MUSC offices. I believe that's it for this one. Also attached to the end of this is an addendum that sort of outlines the other sites that were considered for this and why this site was chosen in particular. That's just more for informational purposes.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Beck. And don't feel the need to belabor the presentation on this one. I think it kind of speaks for itself. But thank you. Anything further? Nope. And Mr. Beck's muted again. Any public comment, Tori?
We don't have any.
City staff comments and recommendations.
All right. The building is found to be unremarkable with no real character defining elements. And any grand trees on site will need to be addressed by TRC. We are recommending approval for demolition.
Thank you. Very short and sweet. The applicant technically has a response period. Anything from the applicant?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Beck. Board discussion and a vote. What does the board have to say about agenda item number 2?
This is Lydia Sobchuk. As staff comment number 1 said, this building really unremarkable. And what is planned for it, that property is progressive for NDRC. So I agree with approval for demolition.
Thank you. Further board comments?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for approval of the demolition of the structure.
Motion has been made for approval of demolition of the structure at 20 Earhart Street, 20 Earhart Drive, excuse me. Is there a second?
I will second. Lydia.
Second by Ms. Sobchuk. I have a motion and a second, so I'll proceed to call the roll. Ms. Wheeler, how do you vote on this agenda item?
Aye in favor.
Mr. Metters,
Aye in favor.
Ms. Sobchuk,
Yay in favor.
and myself, yay in favor. The motion to demolish is approved. Ms. Parrish, what do we have for agenda item number 3?
And now we're moving next door to 28 Earhart Drive. The request is the same. The request is final approval of demolition of the structure. Again, medical district. This one was built in 1960, Old City District. Context slides. Again, Earhart is top to bottom on the page. And B Street is across the top. This is the front of 28 Earhart. Slightly different type of structure. This is back on B Street looking east with Earhart to the right. And then again on B Street looking west. And then looking south on Earhart, the structure would be on your left, a couple of parcels down there. And we'll have Mr. Beck with this one also.
All right, Mr. Beck, you again have the floor.
Thank you. Again, Jake Beck, AIA with LFK Architects. This is very similar to the previous submittal. We will try to be expedient here. Next slide, please. Site context again, be in Earhart Street, adjacent to the previous site. 2 more slides for me. Building to be demolished in orange here, site extents in red. Next slide, please. There is again a few trees that will need to be demolished with this. This has been proposed and approved by the BZA. Next slide, please. Again, this involves demoing the building and some hardscape in front of the building. Next, please. One more for me. That's the site context again. A little bit better look at the building here. Single story brick building, single family residential, currently houses in USC offices. Next slide, please. Here's a look at the back side of the building. There is a lap siding portion here as well with front porch, but brick single story. Next slide, please. One more. Again, Sanborn Maps, the housing information that we were able to find on this year built in 1960, 2-bedroom, 2-bath home of that era. I believe that's all the comments I had regarding this.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Ms. Parrish, any public comment on this agenda item?
There's none.
Okay. City staff comments or recommendations?
Number one, while staff is reluctant to encourage the demolition of anything historic, we found this building to be unremarkable and with few character defining elements. Number two, any grand trees on site will need to be addressed by TRC, and we are recommending approval for demolition.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Beck, anything in response?
None at this time, thank you.
I didn't think so. Board discussion and a vote on agenda item number 3.
And this is Carol Wheeler. This is similar to the previous agenda item. It's not a contributing structure, so I would move ahead and make a motion for approval for the demolition of the structure.
I have a motion for approval of demolition of this structure. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Mr. Metter seconds. I'll proceed to call the roll. Ms. Sobchak, how do you vote on the motion?
Yay in favor?
Mr. Metters,
Yay in favor.
Ms. Wheeler,
Yay in favor.
and myself, yay in favor. The motion for demolition passes. Thank you to the applicant.
Thank you.
Mr.
Parrish?
Robinson,
Yes.
I would recuse myself for the next 2 items.
Okay. And that reminds me, Mr. White was recused from agenda item number 1. Are we bringing him back in?
He is not going to be in attendance.
Got it. Okay. Well, I believe we still have quorum with Ms. Sobchak here, correct?
We will have 3. We'll have you, Mr. Metters, and Ms. Subject. And
Okay.
we have quorum.
Okay. Thank you. We'll bring Ms. Wheeler back then after this agenda item. Tori, agenda item number 4.
All right, I've moved Ms. Wheeler off of the panelist position for now.
Okay.
And agenda item number 4 is 1080 and 1090 Morrison Drive. Requests approval of the mock-up panel for new construction of an office building with ground floor retail and parking deck. East Central Neighborhood Historic Corridor District. Morrison Drive traverses the screen here, and the project is on the east side of Morrison. These are some existing site photos taken from Morrison Drive. All right, and with this one, we have Mr. Zach Carmen. He's been promoted to panelist.
Mr. Carmen, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you. My name is Zach Carmen. I am the project manager for the Milton Group, the architect for the project. You can fast forward probably 7 or 8 slides to the first photos of the mock-up panel. 2 more. Okay. Tori, just to let you know, this is our previous submission, but I'll still address the comments. Okay, so thanks. I want to thank everyone for joining us on site on Friday. Kind of just want to go through the comments that were generated last time that we were deferred a few weeks ago. A few of the comments that we had is first was regarding the overall quality of the metal panel installation on this 1090 elevation. So what we ended up doing was reinstalling the metal panel, taking it down and reinstalling a new metal panel and that lower canopy roof there above the storefront. We think it reads a lot better in the field now that's been reinstalled. It's higher quality. It's been tightened up a lot. In addition to that, we've removed all the 2-inch J trim on the, if you go to the next slide, let's see if we, okay, you can go back one slide, apologize. Okay, so the canopy supports at the first floor there on the 1090, we've removed all that J trim. And like I said, this is the previous submission photos, I apologize. So we've removed all the 2-inch J trim, gotten rid of a lot of the residential looking elements of the project that were brought up last time, a lot of the concerns, and replaced everything with a 1-inch J trim around the storefronts. And then we removed the J trim in its entirety at the base plates of that canopy in front, in addition to around all the lighting. So the metal panel now goes behind the canopy supports and behind the lighting. So it reads a lot cleaner. There's a lot fewer penetrations through the metal panel. So we're much happier with the overall look and overall feel of that metal panel installed on site. Regarding the sealant color, we kind of settled on 2 sealant colors on site. One was Moonlight, and the other one was Dover Sky. If you want to go to the next slide. So those 2 brick control joints you see on the left there. Just wanted staff or board comment on which color they preferred. The Dover Sky, which was the one on the right, is the one that's closer matched to the new blended brick and mortar color, which you saw on the sill and the through wall flashing. Regarding that blended brick and mortar color, we changed it to a new color called Colonnade Gray. We ended up painting that window sill on the left there to that blended brick and mortar color and repainted the through wall flashing at the bottom of the brick to better match the blended brick and mortar color on site. We did work with city staff last week to kind of hone in on that color itself. Regarding the slate shingle cap, we did end up adding a trim piece at the top of the slate shingles there on the left to cover the fasteners for the slate shingles. So the fasteners are now concealed and it's in a charcoal gray finish to match the jam trim of that rain screen slate shingle system. Regarding the parapet cap, the break metal preformed parapet cap, we got rid of the 45-degree angle and now sits completely flush with the metal panel and no longer has that kick out. We did talk with Tori and Lawrence a few weeks ago about the brick detailing. There was a question about kind of what to do with the brick, whether or not staff preferred it to be solid rather than mitered corners. After discussion, we kind of came to the understanding that since the brick is whitewashed and if you cut it, it'll expose the clay brick. We decided that the brick was of high enough quality to not require any more modifications. So the brick itself was left in its original condition that we submitted a few weeks ago. Like I said earlier, we did paint the sill pan flashing, and that'll be consistent around the entire building for the curtain wall and storefront systems. So instead of seeing the black there, it'll be the blended white or the blended brick and mortar color, which is that Colonnade Gray. And then I think there was one other comment regarding kind of the overall water tightness and waterproofing of the mock-up from last time. Just wanted to make it known that we did work with Applied Buildings Sciences, worked with Scott Harvey over there. They're our waterproofing and envelope consultant. They did review our construction documents, our spec book, and our mock-up design. And in addition to that, they will be doing some water testing on the building itself. So we're confident that the building won't have waterproofing issues. So between that and kind of firming up some of these details with the metal panel, reinstalling the metal panel, we think we've been able to mitigate a lot of those issues that were brought up recently. And other than that, I think I am done with my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carmen. Any public comment on this agenda item, Ms. Perry?
No, sir.
All right, we'll move to city staff comments and recommendations.
The previous board motion was for a reworking of the metal parts. The workmanship on these items has improved. Number 2, staff agrees with the use of the darker color at the lintel over the slate panel. Number 3, all vinyl siding like J molds on metal panels should be eliminated. 4, provide sealant at ends of the sill flashing. And 5, staff has long advocated that flashing should be as inconspicuous as possible. And therefore, flashing should be minimized, should have hemmed edges, and should be held as tightly against the building's exterior surface as possible, and should match the color of the adjacent primary building materials. We are recommending approval with board and staff comments.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Parrish. Any response, Mr. Carmen?
Yeah, a couple of comments. Number 3, we reduced the J trim as much as possible. So we did get rid of the J trim around the steel plate at the canopy and at the light fixtures. But the panel manufacturer recommended that we still use that 1-inch J trim at all storefronts based on the way it's installed. If not, you're gonna have to field modify all those panels, and you can probably see on the mock-up itself, it scratches quite easily. So we think we did enough, or as much as we could, I should say, to reduce the J trim. So I don't know if that's good enough, but we did reduce from 2-inch to 1-inch, which kind of gets rid of that residential feel. And then I guess I just want a little more clarity on number 5 and what exactly are we talking about the through wall flashing at the base? Is there a particular thing on the mock-up that would not suffice? Comment number 5, I guess.
I'll let Ms. Parrish address that directly.
So we believe that you have you've created a hemmed edge along the top at the parapet capping. So I feel like you've addressed this in a lot of areas already. The through wall flashing, I don't have an image of it right now, but however much it can be held back and minimized, that's our preference.
So closer to the brick.
Sure. Yes.
And kind of, as you said, Mr. Carmen, to the greatest extent practical. I understand what you're driving at. I think that's what Ms. Parrish is saying to the greatest extent practical. Correct?
That's correct.
All right.
Okay. Understood.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Just for clarification on 3. We talked about this on site Friday. So Zach, I was under the impression when we were on site Friday that you had to use a J molding with that material application on that project. Is that right or wrong?
That's correct. Typically, they'll install the Z furring strips, and these panels kind of go into it and slide across the face of the building to lock in. And so one end of the run of metal panel needs to have a J trim piece to cover that joint, and then it kind of laps from there on out all the way until get to the other corner of that joint. And so if you don't have that, you have to field modify every other layer of paneling. And we found out from before, and you can kind of tell there's a couple scratches on the mock-up panel today. Whenever you have to bend and field modify that, it becomes quite arduous, and it can lead to some really, you don't want the metal panel when it's finally installed to look like it's been on the building for 10 years and scratched up. So we think a 1-inch J trim will greatly impact the maintenance in the final installation product versus trying to get rid of J trim throughout. That makes sense.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't. It sounded like you answered my question to begin with one way, and then as you talked about it, it was different. So you can install it without the J molds.
The metal panel manufacturer does not want us to do that. I asked them to do that based on your original comment from 5-6 weeks ago, whenever that was, and they said that they would not warranty that product. So that that's what they're saying, the way that you can install it, they recommend the J trim. They don't have a standard detail to where both runs of that metal panel on both sides does not have a outside trim piece.
So on a very positive note, the modifications that were made to this mock-up from our last meeting to this meeting were very good. But where that J channel remains, It again looks, as the vinyl siding is installed. I'm sure it's not, it's the same concept. And I know that this is not supposed to keep all of the water out. That you do have some type of actual waterproofing behind this material, but you certainly do have two different looks there. And I really, if I don't know, this is tough for me with that, the use of that J mold for this installation. It really is not, it's just not a very positive look.
And
Even the 1-inch trim, because it is only on the 3rd floor on this building.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And that's the other thing. I've got the pictures on my camera that I'm looking at right now. I'm sorry we don't have the pictures on the screen, so I can be more.
and James, if I could
precise.
gently interject, we're technically in applicant's response, and you had a question's been addressed. Would you object to us moving this conversation to board discussion and a vote?
Okay, thanks.
And I'll let you jump right back in. You
Yep,
can
yep.
make your comments where you are, but I want to go from the question and the applicant's rebuttal to us having discussion
Fair enough.
without objection. And Mr. Metters, please continue with your remarks.
Thanks, and sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. I did get caught up in that, excuse me. Tori, some of the other places where you had the head flashing, where you could actually stick a pin into the end of it, you could look through into it. I think Lawrence got a picture of that. And those areas, need to be, I don't know how they're going to be tightened up. We talked about maybe returning that flashing into itself or something. I don't know what the design for that is. But it was still fairly open in several areas. Where the metal is used to cover a portion of the sill at the base of the windows in one area, and maybe it was just the assembly process, but there was a gap on the back right side where you could actually see in behind the brick sill. So how those things are going to be waterproof, still, I was unsure, and that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. We are, as a friendly reminder, we are now technically in board discussion, potential for a vote. What do my fellow board members have to say about this agenda?
This is Luda, so the panel in general much improved, but there's still particularly the metal areas and brick, but there's still some issues with some of the areas of the metal installation, and they are depicted in staff comments. There's also one which I don't have a photo, but under the canopy, lower canopy, there is a flashing or trim which doesn't have a closure on the ends of some sort, and it's really rough and visible, will be visible. So something needs to be done about that. We discussed that at the site on Friday. But other than that, I guess this J trim is or mold needs to be explored probably a little bit more, and maybe with ongoing with staff. But other than that, I'm in agreement with staff comments and recommendations.
Thank you, Luda. Further board comments?
You are left.
That's true. Thank you. Here's what I would say regarding an applicant architect who is using these preformed systems. I think that they're somewhat at the mercy of the manufacturer, and I'm hearing what is being said about voiding warranties and the fact that the manufacturer specifically made recommendations not to alter these pieces on site. And I have to tell you, I'm somewhat sympathetic to that. But the alternative criteria is we just say you can't use these materials, full stop. If we're going to get into altering manufacturer's recommendations, which I don't think anyone's advocating for, but we continue to see this problem with these prefab systems, whether they be on the mock-up or on the whole site. And I think we're probably going to have to make some decisions about how we deal with those materials, that there's just incompatibility between these pre-engineered materials and how we need to apply them in Charleston. Be that as it may, I think that the applicant has done the best that they can in greatly improving this mock-up, and as Tori has said, to the greatest extent practicable, which I interpret to be meeting our standards, minimizing the objections we had, but still using the material as directed by the manufacturer, says having done the best they can. So I will vote to approve with board and staff comments. That being said, I'll look for a motion from my fellow board members.
I want to ask a question. So
Sure.
we have a few questions here, and how do we know? And I guess you're saying staff will be monitoring, but again, how do we know that we approve this mock-up and some of these details will have to be looked at the actual construction? And so when that will happen? And
Well, we have two traditional remedies, and Mr. Metters can correct me if he disagrees with me on this. One is to add a caveat to any motion that we approve that would say that there would be final staff approval on any of the enclosures, or to prevent any open gaps in the metal trim finish system. Whether it's this or any other project would be to have final staff approval on resolving that matter. And the other one is the traditional enforcement mechanism of the BAR, which we say that something's not in conformity with what staff is recommended to approve or what this board approved. Those are our enforcement mechanisms. Or to turn it down.
I guess also, what is a staff recommendation on those two selections? What would be most efficient?
I guess I would direct that to Tori to the extent that she's comfortable commenting as to whether she's made her recommendation this evening, but as to whether final staff review or approval would be acceptable on this item, given the issues raised about the J channel and any of these edges not being fully enclosed.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, we will take a look at the gaps. I think it comes down to how comfortable you are with not looking, whether you want to see it one more time or not. I don't know if there's a mechanism where it's not a formal board meeting, but we can use a couple of board members without initiating quorum, if that's a mechanism we have, and that's a route we want to go. But it really just comes down to how comfortable you are, how important these items are to you.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, we've got it in our staff comments, and Ludus made comments, and I've made comments, and if this is approved here, then it's approved with those comments. And so if this work is not fulfilled at the end of the project, they won't be able to get a CO.
I would agree with that. I would very much agree with the sentiment of that comment, Mr. Metters, to the greatest extent possible. The limitation shown to us to the applicant, I think we've addressed what would be a grounds for problems down the road with both the J channel, the quality of the fit and finish, and any exterior gaps in the finish system.
I agree with that. And so I'll make a motion for approval of the mock-up with all staff comments and board comments.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. The motion, as I understand it, is to approve the mock-up incorporating all board and staff comments. Have I restated it correctly?
Yes, sir.
All right. Is there a second?
Could we add with final staff monitoring?
Oh, I'm fine with that.
With final approval by staff?
Yes.
Do you accept that friendly amendment, Mr. Metters?
Yes, sir.
So the motion is for approval of the mock-up with board and staff comments, final staff approval. Ms. Subchuck, you've made that friendly amendment. It's been accepted by Mr. Metters.
Do you mind if I ask a clarification about the motion right now?
Sure.
This is interpreting, this puts it in staff's hands, and we're caveating all this with to the greatest extent possible. I mean, that's not part of the motion.
Well, it's not part of the motion, but those are our comments as a board for this evening, which tried to balance the applicant's constraints as articulated to us this evening regarding the manufacturer's requirements and voiding a warranty with what I understood to be your tacit approval that you would work with the applicant and, reach a consensus on them having conformed to what they need to do to build a building to code and in conformity with the manufacturer's instructions, but at the same time, to the greatest extent possible, meeting our aesthetic requirements. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Okay, all right. So having said that, we have a motion and second. Mr. Metters accepted the friendly amendment. Ms. Sobchak, do you second the modified motion by Mr. Metters?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll proceed to call the roll. I vote in favor of this motion. Mr. Metters, how do you vote?
Yay in favor.
And Ms. Sobchak?
Yay, in favor.
Okay, so it passes. Thank you to the applicant, and we will expect you to continue to work with staff of addressing the balance of your requirements for construction with our aesthetic requirements. Thank you again. Agenda item number 5, Ms. Perry.
And this is 741 Meeting Street. Request approval of mock-up panel for a new mixed-use structure, East Central Neighborhood Historic Corridor District. Okay, this parcel sits between Meeting Street and Interstate 26, as outlined in the red box. And then the existing site photos are of the previous structure that existed on the property. This one is looking north on Meeting Street and looking south on Meeting Street. And with this one, we will have Mr. Craig Clements, and he has been promoted to panelist.
Great. Mr. Clements, you have the floor when you're ready.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
And as
Wait a minute.
As soon as Mr. Clements said that, we appeared to have a signal issue. Don't worry. We'll get you back with us, and any downtime will not count against your presentation.
He's back.
Okay, great.
Okay. Thank you all. And I would just thank all the members of the board who came out and took a look at the panel on Friday afternoon. And I would consider that to have been my presentation. So I'd love to hear from you all and your response to it. It's a very simple building. It's brick, stucco, and metal, essentially. And I think everyone got to take a look at it on Friday afternoon. So I will yield the balance of my time to you all.
Thank you, Mr. Clements. Any public comment on this agenda item, Tori?
This one does not have any.
Okay, didn't think so. We will then move to city staff comments and recommendations.
Okay. So we have 2 staff comments. Number 1, extend the dark paint over under the opening in the stucco portion to indicate the full beam flange as the lintel. And number 2, staff has long advocated that flashing should be as inconspicuous as possible, and therefore flashing should be minimized, should have hemmed edges, and should be held as tightly against the building's exterior surface as possible, and should match the color of the adjacent primary building materials. We are recommending approval with board and staff comments.
Excellent. Any rebuttal or further response from the applicant?
Oh, none.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clements. We will then proceed to board comments and a possible board motion and vote.
Mr. Chairman, I'll take a lead here. I thought this was one of the best mock-ups that we have seen. So thank you very much, Craig. My two comments, there was one window sill, which was on top of the subsill that we just need to make sure in the final application that all sills have a slope to it. The second is about the hemmed edge of the flashing being recessed just inside of the mortar line as Tori has laid out in comment 2. And those are all of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would share in Mr. Metter's sentiments, further board comments.
This is Luda Sobchuk. I'm going to echo James' comment about this is one of the better mock-up panels we have seen recently. I actually like how the stucco is done. It's smooth. It's there's a good attention, and rest of it is just what staff comments and recommendations, as well as James. I think it's going to be a really nice looking building.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sobchak. And I, again, join in your comments and therefore would entertain a motion on this agenda.
Well, I'll move for approval of the mock-up with board and staff comments.
There's a motion to approve the mock-up with board and staff comments. Is there a second?
I second that.
There's been a motion and a second. I'll proceed to call the roll. Mr. Metters, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay, in favor.
Ms. Sobchak?
Yay, in favor.
And myself, yay, in favor. Thank you to the applicant.
Thank you all.
Ms. Parrish, am I correct? Did I state correctly at the beginning of our agenda, since it's moved around several times in the past week, that items 6 and 7 are deferred?
That is correct.
Okay. All right.
So I'm going to find Miss Wheeler. And she's going to come back in as a panelist. And then we will move on to item number 8. Okay, she's back in. All right, item number 8 is 176 Concord Street. The request is preliminary review of facade enhancement with final review by staff. French Quarter, Height District 5630V, Old City District. And the aerial here shows the property is located east of Concord and then south of Cumberland and north of Bendu Range. This is again the site and the Ashley River beyond, but this is the old building. Older context there again. And this is showing the intersection of Bendu and Concord. All right, with this item, we've got Mr. Nathan Schutte, and he has been promoted. He's ready.
Mr. Schutte, when you're ready, you have the floor. Well, let me do this. I see Mr. Batista, who I think is affiliated with this project, has raised his hand. I don't know if he's on the list of applicant presenters, or Mr. Schutte, maybe you can tell us what Mr. Batista did.
Making the opening comments.
Say again?
Mr. Batista should be making a couple of opening comments. So
Okay, great, during your time. Well, Mr. Schutte, if you're prepared, you have the floor.
Mr. Batista should be showing up any second now. There he is.
Mr. Batista, if you can unmute yourself when you have a moment. You may be trying, but don't worry, it's not counting against your time.
there it is.
No worries. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the board and city staff for working with us on some of these enhancement and changes. And I'm very excited to share them with the board. We've had an opportunity to share them with city architect, Ms. Tori Parrish, but I do want to thank you for all the work. I believe most of this board was here when we first got this project approved for the Cooper Hotel. So with that, I'll let Nathan Schutte walk us through all the enhancements that we have added to the facade for this wonderful building.
Thank you, Mr. Batista. Mr. Schutte, you have the floor.
Good evening, Nathan Schutte with McMillan Pasden Smith. This is a rare opportunity for us to come back to a board with a project that has full approval to talk about some opportunities to enhance a project before its completion. So tonight I'm going to do my best to walk you through those refinements, and hopefully we can have a nice conversation about the future of this project. Next slide, please. To give you a bit of an orientation, admittedly, up is not north. North is planned left here. The harbor is up on this drawing. All of the subsequent drawings are on the cardinal directions. So to our south, we'll begin with Concord Street. Next slide, please. We've had a good bit of conversation historically with this board about Concord Street and opportunities to enliven it and enhance it. We are not making any changes to anything that happens on the ground floor. Changes on this facade are exclusive to the addition of balconies. The top elevation is the previously approved Concord Street elevation. We have added 2 entire stacks of balconies. In total, I believe it is 17 additional balconies to this facade, and adjusted their alignment per the drawing you see in the middle. Next slide, please. In addition to the balconies that we've enhanced Concord Street with, we would like to add a small detail, and that detail is evident in the vertical pickets of the rail on the axon on the right-hand side. We've had long conversations with the board about keeping these balconies a very clean, a very simple aesthetic. That said, we have challenged ourselves to try to come up with a very elegant way to add a little bit of something to that, and we're proposing that in the alternating picket detail that we've proposed and is evident here on the far right-hand side. Next slide, please. The small perspective in the upper left is the perspective we shared with the board at our final presentation for this project. The enlarged one in the lower right, as will be for all of the future renderings you see in this presentation, is the proposed enhanced facade. So you can see the additional balconies, bringing the total balconies on Concord Street to 33. If we can move to the south elevation, or the next slide, please. We've carried that enhancement of additional balconies to the south elevation. You'll see the previous above, and then below it are proposed by adding balconies to this elevation, which overlooks Waterfront Park. We've also spent a little bit of time studying the porch vocabulary in the center portion of the facade and made a minor adjustment to extend the upper balconies out about 3 feet. The 2 plans on the right-hand side of the page, the left-hand plan shows the column line as it was previously approved, kind of in line with the face of the building, where the entrance or the retail entrance below it projects stepped out. We are bringing those balconies, exact same details, exact same profiles, out to that projected edge. This may be better seen in the axons on the next slide, please. So on the left, you'll see the previous, where the elevated balcony or porch over porch was effectively in line with the facade. We've pulled that out to align with the face of the retail entrance and the public entrance to the rooftop below, as well as the additional depth that the balconies provide and promote along this elevation here in this axon as well. Next slide, please. The net result, we think, is a considerably more stunning elevation overlooking the waterfront park without a grand change in scope. Again, the detailing is the same. We've just adjusted its plane, added some depth, and added some activation to the overall design. Next slide, please. This is another view, effectively more like the out by the harbor looking back, and you get a better sense of the additional balconies. The enhancement of these balconies enable the patrons actually to even step out of their rooms, increases the glass along this facade, really just makes a nice gesture to the south towards the park. Next slide, please. We are proposing a change at the roof. We've had this public rooftop on what is the 6th level of the hotel. It's accessible through the entrance we were just looking at on the south elevation, but have really recognized the need to extend the life of this space. So we're proposing two changes to that roof. One, we are proposing to extend the covered area, what is planned north or to the east towards the harbor. We're not making it any wider, we're simply extending that space out a little closer to the harbor. Additionally, we would like to enclose with operable glass walls a portion of this space. Thank you, Lawrence, for the outline here. To extend the life and the public active use of this space over the park and over the water, really for our broader use. Next slide, please. By not making it any wider, we haven't introduced it to any more apologize. It does not have any greater impact to the south than it did before. It's still concealed predominantly behind that facade at its same plane. However, we are kind of excited about what it does to the east elevation. Next slide, please. We did bring it out to the harbor side, but we didn't bring its enclosure out to the harbor side. And we really like how this structure now sits as kind of a light finish to the top of this form, somewhat similar to the roof structure at the opposite end of the project, kind of far in the distance there out to the north. So it adds a layer of finesse. We like its lightness. We like what it does for the facade, but we also like what it does to extend the use of the space. So we want to talk a little bit about that. We've also had an opportunity to really study the life of the elevated courtyard, the space above the big ballroom porch in the center of the project. Next slide, please. Within this courtyard, we have the opportunity and have introduced the porch vocabulary that we saw overlooking the park to the south into this courtyard. So the middle drawing here, the upper elevation, you can kind of see where in this courtyard we had just a few balconies and a pretty regular set of windows. What we are proposing are 2 levels of balconies along the long facade at the back of this courtyard, and then a single run of porches on the north elevation. This opens up the courtyard, it finishes the space, creates a really nice completeness to the vocabulary. We've also taken the shutters that we saw present on all of the other facades and continued them throughout this courtyard to, again, heighten that level of finish and complete the design. Next slide, please. Here's a couple of views of those porches. Again, this isn't new detailing to the project. We're going to use the same porch over porch detailing we have on the south. We're just using it here on what is the east elevation of the courtyard, and then in a single story of it there in the distance on the right-hand side on the north elevation of the courtyard. Next slide, please. And as this project has lived a long life, we still tend to learn things about our own designs. On the left plan, you'll notice that we had this set of porches off of the lobby that overlooked the harbor to plan north. To access that, we had a stair that came up from the right-hand side of the project south up to that terrace so the public could get up and down to this wonderful little outdoor space. As we've continued to talk about this, we've realized that we had it in the wrong spot. And really to best engage the public, patrons, and to energize the space and the life around this corner of the project, that stair needed to come down to the north, more effectively in front of Fleet Landing and the motor court. This also offers a much better arrival experience for those who wish to just come enjoy the restaurant without having to navigate the hotel itself. Next slide, please. So not much has changed visibly from the motor court, with the exception of that little space underneath what we've affectionately called the conservatory, the glassed-in area in this rendering, really now affords a visitor the opportunity to move through that loggia arrive at a small landing and move up a grand stair into the restaurant. Next slide, please. And in this last slide, you can see how it can connect both from the public realm of the River Walk and the space in front of Fleet Landing to the motor court and ascend up into the exterior porch in front of the restaurant. In conclusion, we're very excited about these changes. It's a rare opportunity to get to come back and share with the board opportunities for enhancement. And we would ask for your support and appreciate the feedback as we continue to make this project, strive to make this project everything it needs to be. Thank you.
Thank you to the applicant. All right, Ms. Parrish, any public comment on this agenda?
Yes, we do. We have Ms. Minigan.
Okay, Ms. Minigan, you have the floor.
Thank you. Erin Minigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. The Preservation Society would like to thank the applicant for meeting with us and walking us through the proposed changes. We agree the revisions present upgrades to the previously approved hotel design, and we are supportive of the request. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Minigan. Further public comment?
That's all of it.
Okay, thank you. We'll then move to city staff comments and recommendations.
And we have a few comments here. Number one, no objections are made to the proposed building modifications. Number two, all site work and site changes, including the altered design of the park between the boardwalk and hotel, are deferred for a new TRC review and determination of BAR purview. Number three, at the north elevation of the pool terrace, we suggest stacked balconies for consistency with the west wall. And four, provide shutter hardware to include hinges, dogs, and locking devices. We are recommending preliminary approval with board and staff comments, final review by staff, and deferral of site work.
Thank you. Mr. Schweddy, any response? You have a 5-minute rebuttal period if you choose to use it.
No, we're confident that we can work with staff to continue this project on a positive course and look forward to making it a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll now move to board discussion. What do my fellow board members have to say about agenda item number 8?
And this is Carol Wheeler. I have a question from Ms. Parrish regarding staff comment number 3. So you're suggesting stacked balconies on that pool north wall. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, let's get back to here's the perspective. We've got stacked balconies on the west wall, which is on the left side of that. Actually, yeah, it's on the right side of the left image, the left of the right image. And then you're seeing the north wall beyond, which has the single story balconies. We are recommending stacked balconies there also.
Okay. Got it.
Well, I will start.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I can just start now. I think the changes are good, and it's great to see improvements to a building after you already received approval. And I think the addition of balconies, adds to the activation of the building, but also improves the facade proportions, having French doors instead of the windows. I think that's it's an improvement for the facades. Also, adding the railing details helps tying the otherwise very simple balconies, tying them back into the rather traditional language of the building. And so I'm in agreement with staff recommendations, but I don't think that staff comment number 3 is necessary, because that building has, on the east elevation, it's a rather symmetrical building, and the west wall has basically a double stack of balconies, but the pool north and south wall both have a 1-story, I think, porch. So I don't think that staff comment number 3 necessarily has to make it into a motion.
Okay. I would echo Ms. Wheeler on the success of the French doors as opposed to the windows, and also the added balconies, giving a nice rhythm to the facade that it previously lacked. Obviously, we approved it, but I would agree that the richness of the facade, the depth of the facade, and the human scale of the building is improved by what has generally been proposed by the applicant. Further board comments?
And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank Nathan for his precise presentation. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate the upgrades.
Further board comments?
Yes, this is Luda Sobchuk. Thank you, Nathan. This is unusual to be able to add to the project of this level when usually people actually subtract at this time. So improvements are most improvements obviously are improvements, and I'm not going to repeat those. The one consideration going back to this number 3 of staff comments, and I actually think that there is a merit of adding those balconies. It will break that heaviness of the top floor. It's just on that perspective, particularly what it's shown to us, it will give that feel of the stepping back a little bit more if the balcony will be up front. So I'm actually in support of number 3 here. I do have a question. I didn't have a chance. The stair to the restaurant, exterior stair, is that main entrance to the restaurant?
It is the, sorry, this is Nathan, hopefully speaking.
Yes, we hear you. You have the floor and you're speaking.
Yep. So it would be the public entrance to the restaurant if someone did not want to go through the lobby. There's a grand stair inside the lobby as well that will take you up to the restaurant. So it's kind of a both and, but we like the gesture and the public nature of this exterior arrival. Hence we're proposing.
Yeah, maybe that's this perspective, but it's kind of not the main public entrance even so, but it looks a little bit more of secondary. So I don't know, maybe it's the heaviness of the wall and veneer. So I don't know, but in my mind, it could be improved a little bit more and be more cohesive with the porches, what you have around. So that's just my subjective observation here. Other than that, I'm in agreement with most of the comments, and particularly staff comments, and I would be in support of the approval, preliminary approval of this enhancement.
Thank you, Luda. Anything further from the board? If not, I'd be glad to entertain a motion on agenda item number 8.
I will move for the improvement. I'm sorry, I will move for the preliminary approval with staff and board comments, and with the final review by staff and deferral of site work.
Okay, as I understand it, in conformity with staff's recommendation, that's Ms. Sobchuk's motion is for preliminary approval with board and staff comments, final review by staff, and deferral of the site work. Have I correctly restated that, Luda?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. I'll therefore proceed to call the roll. Ms. Sobchuk, how do you vote on this agenda item?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters,
Yay in favor.
Ms. Wheeler,
Yay in favor.
and myself, yay in favor. Passes unanimously. Thank you to the applicant.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Parrish, agenda item number 9.
All right, this one is one you're familiar with, 609 King Street, requesting final approval for partial demolition, stabilization, and relocation of the structure. It is not rated. It sits in Canterbury, Elliott Borough, was constructed between 1925 and 1935, and is in the Old and Historic District. Again, you're probably very familiar with these, but the red box shows you where the existing building currently sits at the terminus of Columbus Street. This is the front facade facing King Street, taken from Columbus Street. We're looking south on King Street and looking north. And this is the historic architectural survey card from 1985. And I am promoting everyone right now. We've got Mr. Gal tonight, Ted Reish, and they're coming in momentarily. Brett Underwood, Patrick Allen, Scott Parker, all right, just a moment. I'm looking for Ron Owens and Will Purvis.
I don't believe those two will be joining us.
Okay, then I think everybody's been promoted.
Okay, thank you, Ted. Who will be leading off for the applicant this evening?
I'm Richard Gao with LS3P, and thank you for letting us come back to you so soon for this application. I'm with Patrick Allen from Liberty, Scott Parker from Design Works, and in case we need any structural input, I have Mr. Brett Underwood from our engineering team, Britt Peters, since Mr. Matters appeared to have a question last time for him. And so we'll be very brief. We were deferred last time, asking that we increase the amount of the historic building to be saved. We were talking about moving it to the south, and the board asked that we save more of it. So we are in this application increasing our ask from 12 feet of depth to 25 feet of the building to be retained and relocated. Could we go to slide 9, please? We're all familiar with what we just passed. We've looked at it many times. And so the reasoning behind why we're asking for 25 feet is because it allows the folks in the city walking by to see that that the building did have a step in the parapet. You can see the red line indicates the part that we would save to the right, and that the step in the terracotta parapet would be visible. And if you zoom in, you could see that there are 2 windows that were once blocked, that were once there, that were blocked, and we have that option to reopen that. And that would give us 25 feet of wall and an entire alley really to use as interpretive opportunity once completed. Next, could you go to slide 13? Yeah, so this shows the plan, and you can see the red line, and the 25 feet that would be saved is in the front with all the openings. And you can see the truss lines that we have that are dash lines. That shows that there are 2 trusses that would be saved, plus a few feet past the second truss. If you wouldn't mind, go to slide 18. And this section shows the clearest how much we're saving, where the truss lines are, and how much of the building and the far walls that we're asking to save. So we're here to ask for this portion of the building to be saved, the remainder to be demolished, and then this portion of the building moved to another location, and that approval being contingent upon acceptance of where the building gets put, and it's to the board's liking. That's all we have, and we'll entertain any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gow. Appreciate that. Public comment.
All right, we have two tonight. We have Mr. Justin Schrebler from HCF and Ms. Erin Minigan from PSC.
Okay.
You want to go first, I guess?
Yes, thank you, Tori. This is Justin Schwebler with the Historic Charleston Foundation. We'd first like to thank the applicants and the design team for taking the time to exhaustively explore different options for the future of this building. While we'd prefer to see the historic storefront preserved whole and reutilized as part of the programming for the Liberty project, we understand the design and programming challenges for the program. We typically don't support facadism or relocation as a preferred means of preserving a historic structure. The Liberty team have come up with a creative and ambitious program to help preserve this historic storefront. And we appreciate the addition of the extra footage in accordance with the BAR's request from the last meeting. We recommend approval for the partial demolition and relocation of 609 King Street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebler. Ms. Minigan.
Thank you, Erin Minigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. The Preservation Society would like to thank the applicant for reaching out to us this past week to discuss the revised demolition proposal, as well as their consistent communication with us on this project over the past several months. We appreciate the response to the board's direction to study preserving a more substantial depth of the building, at least double the amount previously shown. We feel this proposal retains a sufficient portion of the historic building to allow the form to read as the site is redeveloped. Therefore, we are comfortable with the demolition request and look forward to continue working with the project team as they study sensitively integrating the historic building into the new design. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Minigan. Tori, does that cover all public comment? I think it does.
It does.
All right. We'll then move to city staff comments and recommendations.
All right, we have 3 comments. Number 1, our understanding of the previous board motion is the intent to save and also to have exposed 25 feet or double the previously proposed depth. Board should clarify if the remnant is required to be a fully expressed element once relocated and part of a new design. Number 2, regarding the proposed relocation and any potential contingency plan needed, the applicant has indicated that HAB's quality documentation with measured drawings and photographs has been completed in order to reconstruct the facade if necessary. 3, approval for partial demolition is to be contingent on the approval of a new building for this location. We're recommending approval with board and staff comments.
Thank you very much, Tori. Mr. Gow or any member of your applicant staff care to respond or rebut?
I would simply say that we are very excited about this and the kind of involvement that we've been able to have with the historic groups in the city to make something that was previously neighborhood retail refashioned into the new project as future neighborhood retail for the new community that we hope can be built in this location. So I think this is a wonderful win-win for everybody, and we're really excited about the potential to reuse this portion of the building, but also to interpret, with the help of the historic groups, this district in an interpretive element on the side of the building. So that's all I would want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gow. And I'll respond to that directly by saying, considering where we started with this project, I appreciate the spirit of your comments in working together to find something that is a compromised position, but is certainly not something designed by committee. It is an exciting opportunity. So thank you for the spirit of your remarks and how we got here. That having been said, and the applicant having used their rebuttal period, we'll move to board comments and a potential vote. What do my fellow board members have to say about the latest iteration of agenda item number 9?
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to make a motion if you're ready to have one.
Certainly. We'll hear your motion. If we need some more comment, we'll get it, but let's hear your motion.
I would like to thank Richard for his commitment to the project. I'd like to make a motion for approval as requested with board and staff comments. If already forthcoming.
My fellow board members, the motion made by Mr. Metters is for approval with board and staff comments. I can entertain a second to that motion, or we can entertain any additional discussion if the board feels it's warranted. Certainly don't want to cut anyone off.
Mr. Robinson, this is Carol Wheeler.
Oh.
I just wanted to say I'm happy to second the motion, but there was also a comment by city staff that the board should clarify if the remnant is required to be a fully expressed element once relocated and part of a new design. I would leave that up to the creativity of the design team to integrate that the remnant structure sensitively so that it looks like it is part of the overall composition and not just an added element. But I'm confident that the design team will be able to come up with a solution there.
And I share in your sentiments that this creative team can find a way to successfully integrate this retail element preserved intact into the larger design. So that being said, Ms. Wheeler, you've technically seconded Mr. Metter's motion, which incorporates those board staff comments, the ones you've just made. Mr. Metters, I'm going to take that as a second to your motion as stated. Any further discussion before I call the roll on the motion and second?
I just want to say quickly that applicant had achieved just about everything what we asked during the several meetings we had here about this structure. And congratulations for moving forward with this. And I'm just supporting staff comments, but also looking forward to see what the new design will be and how it will incorporate this this structure here.
And I, again, sharing those sentiments. I think that was important, although I think we've very carefully worked through what to do 609, 613 King Street. I just wanted to make sure that given the course of this project, everyone had their comments or statements regarding this project incorporated, which seems to be a broad sense of thanks and appreciation to what everyone has brought to the table on this. That being said, we had a motion by Mr. Metters for approval with board staff comments, including what we've just recited. Ms. Wheeler seconded Mr. Metters' motion. I will proceed to call the roll. Ms. Sobchak, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay in favor.
Ms. Wheeler.
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters.
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. That passes. The request for demolition and relocation passes unanimously. Mr. Gow, I want to thank you for your patience and your receptiveness to all the suggestions of community stakeholders as well as this board. I know it's been a long process, but I think it is going to be very positive in its final rendition. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Ms. Parrish, agenda item number 10.
Okay, last one for the night, 635 King Street. Requesting conceptual approval for a 240-unit apartment building with ground floor retail. The request also includes extra height at the ground floor and an extra floor through architectural merit. This is Courier Square 2 building, Courier Square Phase 2, Building 1. Kingborough, Elliottboro, Height Districts 4 and 7, and Old and Historic District. So we're just north of where we were a few minutes ago. And this is where the proposed building will sit in the red box there on King Street. Some existing site photos. Looking north on King Street. I mean south, sorry. South. Now looking north. And now we have some of the same team members, but I have added Mr. Gary Brewer, Mr. Braden Novotny, and Mr. Ben Libertrow.
Thank you. Who will lead off for the applicant?
This is Richard Gow with LS3P, and I want to thank everybody for letting us come before you so close to Thanksgiving. You have seen the site, and I'm here tonight with Gary Brewer from Ramza, Scott Parker from Design Works, and Ben Liebetrow from Graystar, who all present. Mr. Chairman, since this is an important building on a north half of a block, I would request that if we could get 20 minutes, I think we could maybe do better than that, but there's a lot to talk about, and it's a very important building, and I just would ask for your indulgence on that.
I would agree with your sentiment, and so 10 minutes on top of the regular 10-minute period is granted.
Thank you very much. So you have seen this site before with buildings 2, 3, and 4 that went around from Line to St. Philip Street. We're talking about the blue square in the center, and we're looking for a height, scale, and mass approval. We're looking for an extra floor to go from 7 stories of zoned to 8 stories through the architectural merit process. In an effort to clarify Ms. Parrish's comment, the ground floor that we are looking to get increased height on is on the south side, and it's because it's a residential floor, and there is a limit of 12, and we're asking for 14, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So just so you could hear that up front, and I will yield now to Mr. Liebetrau.
Hey, can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Good. I'll be very brief. My name is Ben Liebetrau with Greystar, speaking on behalf of Greystar and Evening Post, our partner. We've been in front of the board previously for the other 3 buildings as part of our project. Put simply, just want to mention Greystar is very, very excited about the project. We are thrilled about the opportunity to enhance the urban framework of the city. We believe will ultimately provide a better public realm via our 4 buildings and large quantity of open space. Rich said it earlier, this is a very important building. I think we've taken great care, not only this building, but really the entire city block, congregating all of our parking within this one single building and surrounding it and the other buildings with generous alleys, generous open space. And so this team's going to walk you through the design, but I do want to note Greystar's commitment here locally to open space, extensive community outreach, workforce housing, working with CENA, that still remains. So I'm going to turn it over to Gary Brewer with Robert Stern Architects. Thank you.
So actually, this is Scott Parker. I'm going to start out real quick. The first few slides simply give you the context, location within Cannonboro, Elliott Borough. Next one, please. You can go through these slides quickly. Yeah, again, so looking at building 1 of 4 buildings. Again, the context in relationship to very important commercial street of King Street, Shopping Street, and the relationship to the neighborhood to the north, south, and west. Next. All right, Gary, all yours.
Gary Brewer from Robert Stern Architects. As Ben and Scott have pointed out, building 1 is on the southern portion of the site. Facing King Street, we have retail in the lobby to the apartment building. There is a parking in the middle, and it's wrapped on the other 2 sides with residential. Next, please. The 2nd to 4th floor, all sides of the building are wrapped in residential. Next. And then going up to the 5th to the 7th floor, we have a C-shaped courtyard with the setback facing King Street, but further setback from St. Philip, with the deep portion of the courtyard being farther away from the residential neighborhood. Next, please. The proposed 8th floor. Next, please. And then the roof plan of the entire project, with the 8th floor stepping down to 4 stories and then 5 stories for the townhouses that face towards St. Philip Street. Next, please. Next, please. So on the King Street facade, we look carefully at the southern portion of King Street, the block sizes, the number of different expressions per block, which range from 4 to 11 per block. This is important because the pedestrian experience along these blocks of King Street have a great variety of architectural character, materials, storefronts, and we've tried to consider that in our design of the King Street facade of the new building. Next, please. So here you can see the different ways that buildings on King Street typically meet, with party walls, as freestanding detached buildings, or as buildings that were attached with hyphens. Next. This is the proposed project in comparison to the adjacent heights of buildings, the Guild being 8 stories, Lifestyle Communities Parcel 1, which is under construction, being 9 stories, and then their future phases being 9, 8, and 5, with the future phase of the project, Parcel 3 of EPI being right across the street, having a similar height. Next. In an effort to break down the scale of a facade that is 270 feet facing King Street, we have treated it with 3 different characters. Next, please. Here you can see it at a larger scale. Next, please. And then the overall elevation showing it facing King Street with the proposed Liberty Senior Living to the south and the alley that the 2 buildings form. On the north side is another alley with building number 2 and building number 1. Next, please. Here you can see it at a larger scale with the 3 characters: industrial, transitional, and classical. Next, please. The industrial building has been intentionally set on center with the center line of the Guild Tower, so that the 2 buildings speak to each other by their placement and also by their architectural character. In the future phase of the Post and Kurger building, one could imagine there might even be a pedestrian walk or park that connects the 2 different structures. Next, please. The section, the 4-story portion of the building is directly on King Street. There's a 25-foot setback to the upper level with a pair of towers that connect a centerpiece, which is sort of the opposite of the Guild with its center occupied tower. Next, please. We have looked at industrial structures locally and throughout the United States for character. Next, please. And then the transitional building, intentionally a buff brick building to separate 2 red brick buildings. It too has a 25-foot setback. Next, please. We're imagining that this might take on a kind of modern or deco character. Here are examples in Charleston and elsewhere for inspiration. Next, please. And then finally, the northern portion of the building, the classical building, that's red brick with what might be a stone-like base, and it too having a 25-foot setback. Next, please. And then again, local precedents for classical buildings. Next, please. So the bottom 4 stories are what the pedestrian mostly experiences, and we've taken great care beyond the 3 different expressions to have a variety of different storefronts and canopies and experiences to enliven the pedestrian experience. Next, please. And then the 8th floor, which we're asking for architectural merit, again, we have designed it so that it has a very interesting silhouette. Next, please. And then perspective view, south looking north. Next. Existing. Next. And then proposed, and you can see how the bottom 4 stories of the building are what is predominantly recognized as a pedestrian experience, but the upper levels form interesting silhouette. Farther in the distance, you can see on the left-hand side is building number 2, which is the punctuation mark, so to speak, at the end of this block. Next, please. Next, please. From the north looking south. Next, please. The existing site, which is the first thing that you see when you cross over from Line onto King. Next, please. And the proposed improvement, the Liberty project all the way on the left, the alley between Liberty and building number 1 of the Gray Star project, then building number 2 in the foreground with the gable and the alley between the 2 buildings. And you can see how the 4-story base of the building has a variety of materials and experiences and massing, but also at the upper level on the 8th floor, again, the silhouette of the 3 different expressions for architectural interest. Next, please. Next, please. Moving around to the Line Street, the building number 1's facade is set 135 feet back from Line Street. So what you really experience from the sidewalk are the new buildings, building 2 and building 3, and the existing houses. Next, please. Here you can see how it's set back from St. Philip Street as well. Next, please. And then again, carrying around the brick of the classical building to form this end of the facade. And then on the right-hand side facing towards St. Philip Street, you can see the 5-story townhouse structure with the buff brick building, and then the 2 brick buildings connected with a building that has siding. Next, please. There's an alley between the 2 buildings, between building number 1 and building number 2. Next, please. Existing, next. And then proposed. So you can see heavily landscaped. It's programmed to have retail and perhaps a restaurant, and it's a beautiful alley that will be added to Charleston's urban fabric. Next, please. Next, please. So then moving around to the St. Philip Street side, the C shape of the courtyard is 258 feet from St. Philip Street. It is mostly concealed by building number 4 and the existing houses on St. Philip Street. Next, please. This taller building is also lined with a 5-story townhouse building. Next, please. Here you can see it at a larger scale, with the townhouse building having a brick base and upper level siding, and then the courtyard building above with the buff brick wings. Next, please. It has an alley between building number 1 and building number 4. Next, please. Existing, next. Next, please. And then here you can see the proposed rendering, the pocket park on the left-hand side with the relocated oak tree, building number 4 on the left, and then on the right is the townhouses of building number 1 with a pedestrian alley between the 2. Next, please. Next, please. Then moving to the south side, a facade that is will not be easy to see because once the Liberty project is built, the 2 buildings form the alley, but nonetheless, we have broken down the scale by having from left to right building number 4 with its pocket park. To the right of it is the townhouse building. To the right of that is the end of the courtyard building that is clad in buff brick. On the right-hand side is the south end of the industrial building turning the corner. And then the 2 buildings are connected with a side clapboard building with a brick base, and then heavily landscaped at the pedestrian level. Next, please. Here you can see it at a larger scale. Next, please. And then a view of the alley. Next, please. Existing. Next, please. And then the proposed view of the alley looking towards King Street, and you can see the Guild Clock Tower in the distance. Next, please. Next, please. And then finally, the Bogart view from the St. Philip or the Siena neighborhood, existing. Next. And then you can see on the left-hand side, the western western end of the building with the alley to the right of it. And then the Liberty Building would form the other end of the alley. Next, please. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Rich.
Actually, you're going to hand it to Scott. So
okay.
again, Scott Parker with Design Works. I'm going to take you through this quickly. Most of these landscapes you've seen as a part of the other buildings. Real quick, again, 25% of the site is open space, about a third of a mile of new alleys, pocket parks, extensive landscape, all in very traditional Charleston vernacular. Next. So again, we'll take you through each of these spaces quickly individually. Next slide, please. So the alley to the north is really right off of the main lobby or the main entrance to building number 1. And it also accesses building number 2 and an opportunity to really have some of the lobby activities and retail activities extend out into the space. So opportunities to program the space for those activities. Next. The service court to the north, again, building 1 handles basically all of the parking and the majority of the service for all 4 of the buildings on the site. While it is a service courtyard, it's really designed to be an amenity for the many number of units that will look out over top of it or onto it, and will be used also by pedestrians as well as automobiles and service vehicles. Next. Another key thing, and I should have mentioned it on the previous drawing, but for each of the surrounding properties, the houses, there will be new garden walls constructed that provide a transition from those homes to the alleys and to this new project. Next, please. Again, the north-south alley on the left. Here, the units that Gary talked about will have doors and individual doors and stoops. And the landscapes there are intended to feel almost like private gardens for each one of those units. Next, please. The pocket park at the western terminus of the east-west alley. Next, please. And on the east-west alley, there will be a number of entrances from building number 1 onto the alley. And the units there will actually enjoy porches that will look out onto the alley itself. Next, please. And then where the alley connects with King Street, again, a number of entrances into the building, utilizing the space closest to King for outdoor dining associated with the retail that would be located there. And then a transition into to the west with a small, perhaps colonnade that would transition you to the more residential alley to the west. Next, please. And now I'll turn it to Richard.
Thanks, Scott. So here you have a project designed by a world-class team, and we're going to talk now about the merit for the extra floor. On the left, you see an image that shows the massing of what could be built, and on the right, what is being planned to be built. Next slide, please. And you can see on the left, all the purple is the area of unused square footage, which would result in 261,000 square feet. And on the right, you could see we're asking for about 35,000 of it. We're putting the extra floor in a place where it's going to be barely visible to people, and it's in a C shape so that the height is as narrow as possible to the neighborhood. We're giving up 2 floors where the yellow box is, and the building, where we are going up, is set way back from the street. Next. And this shows it in a larger context. There'll be 8 and 9 stories and 4 stories across the street. And this building is this project is a good example of a mediator between neighborhood and the urban core. Next. And this shows a section where we have the parking in the middle and lining the building. The gray area hatched with the dashed line shows the allowable envelope and how we're lower on the west side, and we're asking for extra height in the middle in the orange. And you can see the sight line from a pedestrian across St. Philip Street. So we're asking for a floor which we feel is not necessarily going to be very visible. Next. And let's not forget that the 1,700 lineal feet of alleys are one thing, but the fact that they are lined, many of them, with living, breathing homes, we're actually increasing the frontages so that we can have eyes on the alley and making a much more responsible Charleston-like place. There are very few projects that can claim that they don't have a back door. For a building of this size, I think we can claim with what we've done on the north side, the west, and the south, that this building does not have a back door, and the developer should be commended for giving up that square footage. Next. And I would say generally what this team has done with the sculpting of the top of the building, the subtle in and out to make the building seem not as big as it is, with the facade changes, the outstanding ground floor. I really think that it's hard to conceive of doing a better job, having seen many projects come before you with the ask for an extra floor. And I think that this has just been very well done, and kudos to Gary and his team and Scott and his team for putting all these design efforts together. Next. That's the end of the presentation. If y'all wanted any other explanation about the extra floor, there is one more slide, but I think, Mr. Chairman, we are out of time. So we could do that in a Q&A, or I'll just yield now to save time. How about that?
I saw you winding up, Mr. Gowan, so I wasn't going to cut you off, and I'm sure we will integrate some of that into our discussion this evening. So thank you, and thank you to everyone who appeared on behalf of the applicant this evening. Ms. Parrish, public comment on agenda item number 10.
Yes, we have Ms. Minigan and Mr. Schwebler.
Thank you.
Thank you. Erin Minigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. The Preservation Society would like to thank the applicant for reaching out and meeting with us regularly on this project. We appreciate their candidness about intending to request an additional floor at BAR after upzoning to the next height district. However, we feel this is an inappropriate attempt to maximize the building envelope and goes well beyond what was intended for the height district, which was designed to be responsive and compatible with the existing context. When the height districts were being redrawn, the Preservation Society was initially even opposed to 6 stories in this area. As we have consistently maintained, taller buildings should be limited to the corridor between King and Meeting Streets to prevent adverse impacts to the adjacent 2- and 3-story neighborhoods. Back in February, we opposed the increase in height to 7 stories on this property and feel the proposed 8 stories of height simply presents too much height for the site and is out of scale with the context. In fact, we feel the additional floor makes the building feel top heavy and diminishes the overall design. We do not support the request for the additional story and feel the board should even consider exercising its authority to reduce height, especially as the building approaches the rear of the block to better transition to the scale of the Cannonboro-Ellaboro neighborhood. The height is exacerbated by the square form of the footprint, which creates long, massive facades that are not adequately broken down. This is an issue on all sides of the building, and the view of the north and south elevations along the alleys especially illustrates how flat and unbroken the facades are. Significant restudy is needed to break down the massing and height to better respond to the scale and patterns of the context. Finally, we have significant concern with the proposed multiple expressions of architecture. particularly on the King Street elevation. As discussed in the board's previous review of other buildings on the site, this approach is generally not appropriate because it presents a disjointed design direction. We feel that rather than having differing styles align closely in the same plane, the design should be restudied with a more unified approach, which will allow the architecture to read with a more authentic expression. Due to the degree of restudy needed to the overall design, a need for more meaningful breakdown of the massing and reduction of height, we urge the board to deny the project as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Minigan. Mr. Schwebler.
Thank you. This is Justin Schwebler with Historic Charleston Foundation. I would first like to thank the applicants for their ongoing communication throughout the evolution of this project. There are many aspects of the development of this site, and the regular meetings and updates have been helpful in understanding the design direction. We do, however, have significant concerns over the height, scale, mass, and architectural direction of this building. We believe 3 stylistic expressions can work on the King Street elevation. However, we would like to see greater refinement in their detailing and ornamentation, and more meaningful separations in the massing between each portion of the King Street facade. We would also like to see grander architectural statements, especially on the Art Deco section. As the central mass of this building, we feel like it should take grander cues from the buildings used as references in this presentation. The addition of a decorative tower or parapet could help make this section of the elevation more distinctive from the rest of the building and add to the skyline of the city to create a strong centerpiece for the development. The other elevations of the building need a complete restudy. We find that the portions of the building along Line and St. Philip Street are far too tall. The building's height should erode significantly as it extends away from King Street, and the south wing in particular will have a significant impact on the view shed from St. Philip and Bogard Street. With their visibility from St. Philip and Bogard, we feel that these elevations should be treated with the same level of attention as King Street, both in architectural style and material quality. In summary, we feel that the King Street elevation needs greater refinement and breaking up of the masses. The western portions of the building are too tall and are lacking in architectural detail, and we recommend deferral of the application as submitted and denial of the additional story for architectural merit at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebler. Further public comment, Ms. Parrish.
That's all we've got.
Okay, we'll now move to city and staff comments and recommendations.
Okay, we've got a few comments. All right, number 1. A multiple expression building can work in this location on King Street. However, there are too many architectural expressions on this building. As we wrap the corners of the King Street elevation, there are additional expressions, and these are problematic. The nature of Charleston buildings is narrow frontage with depth into the block. The north and south facades of this building as proposed present multiple expressions where multiple buildings would not be constructed, as these elevations are not street facing, but interior to the block. Implement 3 expressions or fewer on King Street and continue these meaningfully into the interior of the block to authentically wrap, at a minimum, the 4 7/8 story massing portions. Or number 2, alternatively, use 1 architectural expression. The challenge of making this appear as 3 buildings when the finished floors and heights align would be mitigated in a single expression, while massing modulation would be just as important. And then the next few comments, we're going to walk through the expressions. Number 3, regarding the industrial expression, while the architectural language is not inappropriate, industrial as a label might be inappropriate for this portion of King Street. The street did include some warehouses such as the Morris Sokol warehouse, but industrial buildings were not present. B, omit the classical balustrade. C, decrease the height of the top center, allowing the towers to be the taller elements. D, omit the crenellation of the tower elements. And E, break the large glass panels at the storefront into 2 smaller parts. Comment 4 and 5 are the next 2 expressions. Number 4, regarding the transitional expression. A, raise the center so that the shelf created above the 4th floor at King Street is broken. B, raise the center above the 8th floor so there is less uniformity across the top of the multiple expressions. And C, revise the fenestration within the heavy frame at the center of the 1st and 2nd floors as it is not cohesive. Number 5, regarding the classical expression. A, revise the ground floor storefront bays to be the same or symmetrical rather than have the northernmost bay different while the expression presents symmetry to King Street. B, refine the language to be consistent vertically. The top floor features detailing somewhat inconsistent with the remainder of the building and should be restudied. Comment number 6, regarding the north and south elevations. A, reduce the number of expressions. B, arched windows are used in an inconsistent manner and should be restudied. C, omit the combination of clapboard siding over a rusticated base. This portion should be revised to coordinate with the King Street expression. D, consider accessible unit entries from the alley at the south. Comment number 7, at the 5-story building portion on the west. A, take steps to further unify the north, south, and west elevations in an effort to make the 3 elevations of this portion more cohesive. B, confirm the size of the windows as these appear large for the residential nature of this building. And then staff recommendation is denial with board and staff comments for general architectural direction and height. The building is not found to achieve architectural merit to receive an 8th story.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. Mr. Gal, or anyone for your team, you have 5 minutes for rebuttal or response if you choose to use it.
Okay, I will start and say thanks for a very thorough review of the building. I think that when you look at what we're trying to do on this site by putting all of the parking for the entire block, and we're not a city that has a lot of mass transit, we have no choice but to put the parking on site. And we're doing that for 4 other buildings, literally. That's one of the things that's pushing the building up a little bit and necessitating and requiring us to ask for additional floors. And I have no doubt that our colleagues and architect, Mr. Brewer, can take a lot of your comments and improve or be more appropriate in their next iteration. And at that point, I would like to just ask if Gary would like to say anything.
Yeah, I'd like to say many of the comments are good comments that are worthy of future study. And this, as we all know, is for height, scale, and mass and architectural merit. And we look forward to working with the city staff, Historic Charleston, the Preservation Society, and the board to further develop the design of this building to address those comments and to, in general, improve it, because it is a very important site in Charleston that warrants that type of scrutiny. So thanks again.
For everybody on behalf of the applicant. We will now move to board comments and a potential vote on this agenda item. What do my fellow board members have to say about agenda item number 10?
Can we have some images of the elevations on the screen? King Street, for instance.
Slide 77.
Do you have the page? Oh yeah, you do have page numbers. Awesome. Okay. Lawrence, in our presentation, it looks like it's going to be page 262. They're page 77. That's a watercolor rendering. Is that what y'all want to show? Do you want a front on elevation, Luda?
I think elevations are more, I mean, we will move to the perspectives, but elevations are very descriptive of the, multiple expressions. So.
All right. I'm looking for a page number.
For those uninitiated, including our applicants, the little wristwatch means that the computer is trying to catch up with Lawrence going through the slides. So just patient with us while we get through.
All right, Lawrence, it's page 213 of our presentation, or page 28 of theirs.
Okay, let's see.
Well, sorry about that.
It's fine.
bogged down, guys. Sorry.
While we're waiting, I have actually two questions for the applicant. Can I quickly ask that?
Of course.
The south alleyway, how wide is that as it's currently designed?
20 foot minimum, but it goes in and out slightly.
Mhm.
Here, you can look at this.
If it starts moving here, page 205 is a good one too.
Apparently, it's not going to cooperate. Luda, did you want to extrapolate without the visual?
If Lawrence stops sharing and I start sharing and then we come back to the comments, is that going to mess anything up?
No.
All right.
I think it's okay. We all kind of remember, I guess. I just wanted to have visual, but that's fine.
All right, I'm gonna do it. Hold on, Luda, I got you. I'm gonna stop Lawrence because his is all frozen up.
All right, great.
We're gonna go over here. Okay. Can you see the front elevation?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, as an architect, I can appreciate the challenges of the site and challenges of the function and program. And yes, we're a small city with no public transportation developed. So car is a car. And we're always trying to hide and actually keep in the side. So yes, I guess the square or L-shaped footprint is must. Nevertheless, what we're looking at is very massive building for the area and for the King Street. We have some examples in King Street, but not that size of the building. I'm also concerned about multiple expression here as changing these styles too drastically. And I think that what we had seen on the examples of the King Street, they are not really multiple expressions. They are, I mean, maybe multiple expressions, but pretty much same style of the buildings because they were built pretty much in the same era. And here we're trying to kind of artificially say, you know, this century and that century and this era. And I think that if you look at the more cohesive, you are trying to break in three sections and it's fine, but more cohesive style breaking in these sections and paying attention a little bit more to maybe richer details, it will be more successful. And there's a lot of comments and step comments about different details at the pedestrian level and glazing and proportions. I think it's all very good comments and we should pay attention to it. So again, four stories. I'm finishing now. Four stories facing the King Street. Probably again more successful. And then we're looking this massive 4 stories above, which again pretty much repeating the massiveness of footprint of the story before, and they are overpowering this 4-story which facing the King Street. So again, going all around, I'm just totally agree with staff comments, and particularly with the one where we're talking about multiple expressions.
Thank you, Luda. I didn't mean to cut you off earlier.
No, that's okay.
Further board comments?
This is Carol Wheeler. I appreciate the effort of the applicant, and I would say this is the most difficult building of the entire phase that we have been looking at, because it includes the parking, and it just makes it very difficult to design it. The applicant has mentioned it earlier that creates a lot of challenges, and you could see that in the result, and they needed to add another floor. I also appreciate some other ideas that the design has. For example, trying to create view corridors towards the Guild and other taller buildings in the area, having the parking completely internal from the entire site so that you can hardly see it. And I appreciate the idea of the alleys and the open space. And also some of the massing strategies on St. Philip Street with the 5-story building steps with smaller porches into the 5-story expression and then higher. But there are a lot of issues, I think, with this proposal. And I'll try to be brief, but I'll first talk a little bit about height and then about the expression. So height, the Preservation Society mentioned that before, that the original zoning for the site was 6 stories, and I suppose it was approved for 7 stories in April. And also the site behind here was, I think, approved for rezoning from 2.5, 3 stories to 3 and 3.5 stories. And as Erin Minigan mentioned earlier, the idea of the zoning districts was that the highest buildings will be between King and Meeting Street, and then from there on it should taper down. And this building doesn't do that, and it really doesn't create a transition from the higher King Meeting Street district to the 2.5 and 3-story buildings of the residential neighborhood behind St. Philip Street. I think an additional floor for this building is very inappropriate, just because of the context. Also, if you look along King Street, along the entire length of King Street on the west side of it, I think this building is the only building that is in a 7-story height district. And I don't think the context deserves that. So I understand 7 stories are now allowed per zoning, but I don't think we can go any higher here. I'd also like to challenge the request of the higher ground with the higher residential floor, and maybe Tori, you could move to the south elevation. I think on page 83, if you move up, that shows actually the different heights in that 14-story residential floor. And what is happening with this building is you have a 20-foot first floor on King Street, which is a retail, was at 83. Try to go maybe back and forth. Maybe that's not the right one. The south elevation, if you can, maybe Mr. Gao can help me.
It would be near the other elevation that we looked at.
So we have a 20-story retail space on King Street, and then that 20-story height actually continues, but the elevation shows a 6-foot blank wall and then an elevated 14-foot tall residential floor. So I think that's it here, yeah. So you see the 20-foot height expression on King Street on the right, and then you see those porches are actually 6 foot in the air. So there would be a 6-foot blank wall, or it would be landscape. But for a 20-foot wide alley, that's really that makes that alley not comfortable and not inviting. And in fact, if you start counting the stories here, you would have 5 stories on the left building. And if you keep counting, it would actually be 9 stories that this building looks like from that elevation, and not only 8 stories. So there's a disconnect, I think, between where the retail portion connects to the residential portion, and we really have a 20-foot residential floor, which is not allowed per zoning. So the height really needs to be studied here and reduced, I think. Generally, the alleyway, you have a 20-foot alleyway. That means if you have a property line in the middle, you have 10 foot on each side of the buildings. And that's really necessary to have the appropriate amount of fenestration for the apartments from a building code point of view. So it's really the absolute minimum, I would say. So if you could increase that alleyway, it really would help that the feel and for pedestrians to enjoy that open space. I think there was a view looking through that alleyway where the right side was cut off, probably because you would see another 7-story building right next to it. And that's that perspective here. So on the right side, there would be the new building that we would probably see soon. And if you remember all those discussions we had along the Greenway and how the applicants try to massage the building massing to create some open spaces and avoid that what do you call that, a very narrow view between 2 7-story facades. I think that's problematic and needs to be studied. And I think here it's not really depicted. You can't really see that the porches are really 6 foot high. So you would have a non-activated facade front on the left side. So I think I made my point about the height. Regarding the expressions, Luda had already said a few things about that, and I agree with her and staff. Or I would say I would agree with staff when it comes to the effort to try to go for one expression and not multiple expressions, because it's just not authentic. And I think in this case, the applicant really needs to study massaging the massing and creating some relief in those long facades rather than just having 3 different architectural expressions. If you want 3 different architectural expressions, I think you need to create 3 different buildings, and that's difficult in this case because you're trying to hide a parking garage in the center. And lastly, one thing, if we go to a site plan that I noticed is that the facade on King Street is not parallel to King Street. And if you look along the entire length of King Street, especially to the south, pretty much all of the facades are in line with the sidewalk. So I would encourage to follow that street pattern or that urban design pattern of making that facade parallel. I understand that parking needs to be orthogonal, but I think here we need to follow the street pattern. So I think this project needs to be restudied, and the architectural context and merit should be denied in this application.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. Further board comments on agenda item number 10.
I have no additional comments.
Hearing none, or a second round, does anyone have a motion?
This is Carol Wheeler. I would like to make a motion for a denial with board and staff comments and the encouragement to explore one building expression. Denial of general architecture and height, and the additional 8th story.
Ms. Wheeler, your motion, as I understand it, is for a denial incorporating board and staff comments to explore a single style expression, denial for general architectural direction, and denial of an additional floor based on architectural merit. Is that a correct restatement?
Okay.
Is there a second to Ms. Wheeler's motion?
I will second that.
Ms. Subject seconds. I have a motion, a second. I'll therefore proceed to call the roll. Mr. Matters, how do you vote on this item?
Yay in favor.
Ms. Wheeler,
Yay in favor.
Ms. Subject,
Yay in favor.
and myself, yay in favor.
I want to make one quick comment or reminder. As we had one of these projects denied previously, and architect came back with pretty much same design. We just need to remember that denial it's almost like start all over. So just want to remind that.
Right, and I don't think we have that issue with Mr. Gow and his team. I would, with each application standing on its own merits, I would agree with you that we previously had an applicant who basically resubmitted the same project despite a denial on height, scale, and mass. But I share your sentiments, Ms. Sobchak, and I don't think that'll be an issue.
Well, I just wanted to remind that not wasting their time to start with.
Right.
And yes, and Rich knows that definitely. So.
Correct. Thank you for that. Any further comments from the board before we close the meeting this evening? All right. Thank you all very much. Look forward to seeing you soon. I wish you all a pleasant Thanksgiving week and look forward to seeing you at our next regular meeting.
Yes.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.
Same to you.
Thank you to all.